The wind howled as Ryan Jacobs stepped onto the icy parking lot of his ski lodge, clutching the collar of his old, worn-out jacket. He had built this place from nothing, 14 locations across the country, each one a product of decades of hard work. But lately, something felt off. Customer complaints were piling up, staff turnover was rising, and profits weren't where they should be. Ryan wasn't the kind of owner who sat in an office reading reports. He needed to see the truth with his own eyes. So he made a decision: he'd go undercover as a new ski instructor trainee. His disguise was simple but effective: a shaggy beard, dyed brown hair, and thick ski goggles that covered most of his face. He had never personally met the staff at this particular lodge, and with corporate managing most of the hiring, no one would suspect a thing. He stepped inside the main lodge, where the scent of hot cocoa mixed with the crisp mountain air. The front desk was busy with guests checking in, and employees rushed around, preparing for the day. Ryan approached the staff area and spotted the man he was looking for: Greg, the ski school supervisor. Greg was in his mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered. His voice carried across the room as he barked orders at a young woman struggling to organize rental forms. His tone was sharp, impatient. Ryan cleared his throat. "Hey, I'm the new trainee," he said, keeping his voice casual. "Name's Ryan." Greg barely glanced at him. "Great, another newbie. Hope you can keep up." He handed Ryan a clipboard. "Go to the back, get suited up, and meet me outside. Don't be late." Ryan nodded and walked toward the staff locker room. Inside, several instructors were chatting as they geared up. A young man with dark curls and tired eyes sat on the bench, rubbing his temples. "You okay?" Ryan asked. The guy looked up. "Yeah, just exhausted. Been pulling doubles all week." "We're short-staffed and Greg doesn't let us say no." Ryan frowned. "Why are you so short-staffed?" The man sighed. "A lot of people quit. Pay's not great, and Greg, well, he's not exactly the easiest boss." Ryan didn't say anything, but his gut told him this was just the beginning of what he'd uncover. He suited up and headed outside. The cold air hit his face as he joined a group of new trainees. Greg stood in front of them, arms crossed. "All right, listen up. This job isn't just about skiing, it's about keeping the guests happy. If they're not happy, you don't get tips. And if you make me look bad, you won't last here. Got it?" The group murmured their agreement. Ryan spent the next few hours going through training drills, pretending to struggle more than he actually was. He wanted to blend in, not stand out. As the day went on, he kept an eye on Greg. The man was relentless, snapping at instructors, rolling his eyes at guests who asked too many questions. But what really got to Ryan was how Greg treated one specific instructor, Caleb. Caleb was young, probably early 20s, and clearly exhausted. He pushed himself through every lesson, barely taking a break. At one point, he leaned against his ski poles, breathing heavily. Greg stormed over. "What the hell are you doing?" Caleb straightened. "Just catching my breath." Greg scoffed. "Catching your breath? You think guests pay hundreds of dollars to watch you stand around? Move your ass or I'll find someone who will." Ryan clenched his fists. The way Greg spoke to Caleb wasn't just harsh, it was downright cruel. But he needed to see more before he could act. As the day wound down, Caleb was assigned to one last private lesson. His legs wobbled as he skied down the beginner slope, clearly drained. Halfway through, his knee buckled and he collapsed into the snow. Greg stormed over, furious. "Are you serious, Caleb? Are you really this pathetic?" Caleb struggled to push himself up. I haven't had a break all day." Greg shook his head. "You want a break? Fine. You're done for the day. And don't expect to be on the schedule tomorrow. Maybe you need time to figure out if this job is for you." Ryan had seen enough. His heart pounded. He had come here to understand what was going wrong, and now he had his answer. Greg was running this place like a dictatorship, burning out good employees and treating them like disposable tools. Ryan helped Caleb to his feet. "Come on, man. Let's get you inside." Caleb hesitated but nodded, leaning on Ryan as they made their way back to the lodge. Ryan had planned to stay undercover a little longer, but after what he had just witnessed, he wasn't sure he could. Greg had no idea who he had just humiliated in front of the entire staff. But he was about to find out. Ryan helped Caleb inside, supporting him as they entered the break room. The space was cramped, with a few chairs scattered around and a vending machine humming in the corner. Caleb sank onto a bench, rubbing his knee. His face was pale, his breathing unsteady. One of the other instructors, a woman with a long braid tucked under her beanie, glanced over. Her brows knitted together as she took in Caleb's condition. She crouched beside him, pressing her hand lightly to his knee. "You okay?" she asked. Caleb nodded but winced. "Just overdid it." Ryan squatted down beside them. "You need ice." The woman stood and grabbed a pack from the freezer, tossing it to Ryan. He wrapped it in a towel before handing it to Caleb, who pressed it against his knee with a quiet sigh. Ryan took the opportunity to ask a question that had been gnawing at him. "Why didn't you push back when Greg told you were off the schedule?" Caleb hesitated, his fingers tightening around the ice pack. "Because I need this job," he admitted. "If I argue, he'll cut my hours completely, and I can't afford that right now." The woman leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "Greg's got a habit of doing that. If you don't do things exactly his way, you're out. No second chances." Ryan's jaw tensed. It was one thing to run a tight operation, another to use scheduling as a way to control employees. He needed to see more, though needed undeniable proof before he stepped in. He stood, stretching his shoulders. "I'm gonna grab some air." As he walked back through the lodge, he took in the atmosphere with fresh eyes. Guests bustled through the lobby, their voices overlapping as they planned their next runs on the slopes. A few parents wrangled excited kids into their gear while others sipped coffee by the fireplace. The front desk had a steady line of check-ins, and the rental shop was a whirlwind of activity. Despite the outward energy, Ryan noticed something else. The staff moved quickly, but there was a tension in their movements, a stiffness in their interactions. No one lingered to chat. No one laughed. It was efficiency, but without warmth. He made his way toward the rental counter. A teenage employee fumbled with a pair of boots, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted the bindings. An older man on the other side of the counter sighed impatiently. "These don't fit," the man grumbled. "I told you I need a size up." The teen swallowed hard. I'll grab another pair." As he turned, Greg stepped in, his presence immediate. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "What's the issue here?" The guest crossed his arms. "Your guy gave me the wrong size." Greg didn't look at the customer. Instead, he stared down the teenager. "And why is that?" The kid stammered. I thought." Greg cut him off. "You thought wrong. We don't waste time here. Get him the right pair and do it fast." The teen nodded quickly, hurrying toward the shelves. Ryan watched as Greg turned back to the guest with a tight smile. "Apologies for the delay. We'll have you set in a moment." The man grumbled but accepted it. Greg's expression shifted the second the guest looked away, his patience evaporating into something colder. Ryan could see it now, how Greg controlled every interaction, how he kept employees on edge, never allowing them to feel secure. Ryan turned and made his way back toward the break room. He needed to talk to more staff, needed to understand how deep this problem ran. As he stepped inside, he found a few employees huddled near the coffee machine. The woman who had helped Caleb earlier glanced up. "You look like you've got questions," she said, reading his expression. Ryan leaned against the counter. "Greg, how long has he been running things like this?" She exhaled sharply. "Too long. Corporate barely checks in, and he knows it. As long as the lodge turns a profit, no one asks questions." Ryan folded his arms. "And people just deal with it?" A man with glasses sitting nearby scoffed. "What choice do we have? Complaining doesn't do anything. Anyone who's tried gets their shifts cut or suddenly finds themselves written up for nonsense." Ryan's stomach tightened. He had suspected Greg was running things unchecked, but hearing it confirmed made his frustration burn hotter. The woman shook her head. "It's not just the way he treats us. It's the guests too. If he thinks someone is asking for too much, he'll make sure they regret it. I've seen him subtly pressure people into paying for extra services they don't need, just because he doesn't want them wasting his time." Ryan's fingers curled into a fist against the counter. He had enough. This wasn't tough leadership. This was manipulation, control, and greed. His employees weren't failing, they were being set up to fail. His guests weren't just experiencing occasional lapses in service, they were being taken advantage of. And Greg had been doing it under his nose for far too long. Ryan straightened. "I need to take care of something." He turned and walked out of the break room, his mindset. Greg was about to learn exactly who he had been pushing around. Ryan moved through the lodge with purpose, his breath steady despite the anger simmering inside him. His boots clunked against the wooden floor as he made his way toward the main office. Every interaction he had witnessed that day replayed in his mind: Greg's callous treatment of Caleb, the way he intimidated the teenager at the rental counter, the unchecked authority he wielded over employees who had no power to push back. He reached the door marked Staff Only and stepped inside. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit, lined with bulletin boards displaying outdated schedules and emergency procedures. At the end of the hall was Greg's office, the door slightly ajar. Inside, Greg sat at his desk, flipping through a stack of papers. His expression was unreadable, his focus entirely on the numbers in front of him. Ryan stepped in without knocking. Greg looked up, clearly annoyed at the intrusion. "Thought I told everyone to take a break before the evening shift," Greg said, setting his papers down. Ryan shut the door behind him, his posture firm. "I'm not here for a break." Greg leaned back in his chair, studying him. There was no recognition in his eyes. "All right, what do you want?" Ryan let the silence stretch for a moment before he pulled off his ski goggles and removed the beanie covering his hair. He watched as Greg's expression shifted, first confusion, then realization, followed by something closer to dread. Ryan let the weight of the moment settle before speaking. "You know who I am now?" Greg's throat moved as he swallowed. "Ryan Jacobs." His voice was quieter than before. Ryan stepped closer. "This is my lodge, my company, and I just spent the entire day seeing exactly how you run it." Greg's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Ryan kept his tone controlled. "You've been using your position to push employees past their limits, threaten their hours, and treat them like they're disposable. I saw it firsthand. And that's before we even get into how you handle guests." Greg leaned forward, bracing his elbows on the desk. "I do what's necessary to keep this place running. If I let people slack off, service suffers. Guests expect efficiency, not excuses." Ryan shook his head. "There's a difference between holding people accountable and running them into the ground. Caleb nearly collapsed today. And instead of making sure he was okay, you humiliated him in front of everyone and cut his hours as punishment." Greg's expression hardened. "If he can't handle the job, that's not my problem." Ryan's hands pressed against the desk as he leaned in. "It is your problem. It's my problem. Because the way you treat employees affects everything: morale, service, retention. You think you're keeping things tight, but all you're doing is driving good people away." Greg exhaled sharply. "You don't get it. You're the owner. You see numbers. I see reality. If I don't push, things fall apart." Ryan's voice remained steady. "Things are already falling apart. And you're the reason why." Greg's fingers drummed against the desk, his frustration evident. "So what? You're here to fire me?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. He had built this company from nothing, and he had trusted people like Greg to uphold the same values he had when he started. But Greg had twisted his authority into something toxic. Ryan straightened. "Pack your things. You're done here." Greg's nostrils flared. "You think this place will run better without me? Good luck finding someone who can handle the pressure." Ryan's voice didn't waver. "I don't need someone who thrives on control. I need someone who knows how to lead." Greg's eyes flickered with something: anger, maybe, or disbelief. But he didn't argue. He simply stood, grabbed his coat, and walked past Ryan without another word. Ryan watched him go, then exhaled slowly. The tension in his shoulders didn't ease. There was still more to do. He turned and left the office, making his way back toward the staff area. When he entered the break room, conversations hushed. Employees glanced at him, some confused, others wary. Caleb sat in the corner, his knee still wrapped in ice. Ryan cleared his throat. "Greg is gone." The silence stretched for a moment before someone spoke. "Wait." "What?" Ryan met their eyes one by one. "I own this lodge. I own all of them. I came here undercover because I needed to see for myself what was happening. And what I saw wasn't leadership, it was control through fear. That ends today." A few employees exchanged glances, still processing the news. Caleb's grip on the ice pack tightened. Ryan continued. "I know trust isn't earned in a single conversation. I won't stand here and expect you to believe that everything will change overnight. But I promise you these things will change. No more threats over scheduling. No more pushing people past their limits. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." He let the words settle. Then, for the first time all day, he saw something shift in the employees' expressions: not fear, not exhaustion, but something closer to relief. Ryan took a breath. The real work was just beginning. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was truly leading again. The weight of the day lingered as Ryan stepped out of the staff room, the murmur of employees behind him fading into the background. The air outside was crisp, biting against his face as he inhaled deeply, clearing his mind. Greg was gone, but that was just the first step. The real challenge lay in repairing the damage left behind. He spotted Caleb near the edge of the beginner slope, shifting his weight carefully on his injured knee. Despite the exhaustion still evident in his posture, he seemed more at ease. Ryan approached, watching as Caleb adjusted the bindings on his snowboard, testing the movement cautiously. Ryan stopped a few feet away, keeping his tone casual. "You should be resting that." Caleb glanced up, a hint of apprehension flashing across his face before he nodded. "Yeah, I don't like sitting around." Ryan understood that feeling all too well. He gestured toward the bench nearby. "Walk with me for a second." Caleb hesitated but eventually followed, limping slightly as they moved toward the quieter side of the lodge. Ryan let the silence stretch before speaking. "I should have done this sooner," he admitted. "I trusted that things were running the way they were supposed to, and I was wrong." Caleb studied him carefully, his expression unreadable. "You didn't know." Ryan shook his head. "That's not an excuse. If I had been paying closer attention, you and the others wouldn't have had to deal with any of this." Caleb exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought about quitting more times than I can count. But I love this job, or at least I did before it turned into something else." Ryan absorbed that, the weight of responsibility pressing heavier now that he was hearing it directly. He had built this company with the idea that people would love working here, that guests and employees alike would feel valued. Somewhere along the way, that vision had been compromised. "You'll have the hours you need," Ryan told him. "And more importantly, you'll have a workplace that doesn't push you to the point of collapse." Caleb nodded, something like relief flickering in his expression. "I hope so." Ryan wasn't going to just hope, he was going to ensure it. He spent the next few hours meeting with employees, listening more than he spoke. Each conversation uncovered new layers of mismanagement, requests for better equipment ignored, schedules manipulated as a form of punishment, complaints dismissed without follow-up. The more he learned, the clearer it became that Greg's influence had seeped into every corner of the lodge. By the time evening settled in, Ryan had a plan. He gathered the staff in the main lounge, where the scent of wood smoke lingered in the air. Employees filled the space cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Ryan stood near the fireplace, letting the warmth seep into his fingers as he waited for the last few to trickle in. Once the room was quiet, he addressed them. "No long speeches," he started. "You've all had a long day, and I'm not here to waste your time. But I do need you to hear this directly from me." I stayed locked on him, some doubtful, others hopeful. "Greg is gone," he continued. "And moving forward, this lodge will be run differently. I don't expect you to trust that right away, and I don't blame you. But change starts today." He outlined immediate adjustments, fair scheduling with input from staff, proper rest periods, a new system for addressing concerns without fear of retaliation. He made it clear that leadership would be held accountable, not just employees. As he spoke, he watched the reactions in the room shift. Some remained skeptical, but others straightened, tension easing from their shoulders. When he finished, an older instructor near the back crossed his arms. "And what happens if things go back to the way they were?" Ryan met his gaze without hesitation. "They won't, because I'll be here to make sure of it." He meant it. Ryan had come here thinking he would only need a day undercover to assess the situation. Now he knew he couldn't just walk away. He wasn't going back to his corporate office, not yet. He needed to stay, to rebuild trust, to ensure that the culture he had envisioned for his company was restored. The room was silent for a beat before a woman near the front nodded. "All right, let's see what happens." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. It wasn't full trust, not yet, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The next morning, Ryan arrived early, stepping onto the freshly groomed snow as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the slopes. The mountain was quiet, the usual rush of employees not yet in full swing. He had barely slept, his mind churning with everything he had learned the day before. He knew words alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to show his employees things were truly different. Inside the staff lodge, a few employees were already getting ready, pulling on their gear as they prepared for the first wave of guests. Caleb sat on one of the benches, adjusting the brace on his knee. He looked up as Ryan approached, his expression more neutral than the night before, but still edged with caution. Ryan wasn't here to make grand speeches, he had done that already. Instead, he grabbed a clipboard off the counter and flipped through the day's schedule. His eyes scanned the shifts, noting how things had been arranged. With Greg gone, the previous day's schedule had been carried over, but it was clear things still needed adjusting. The gaps where employees had been stretched too thin were glaring. He turned to the small group of instructors gathering near the door. They looked at him differently now, not with fear, but with curiosity. Instead of making an announcement, Ryan took the schedule and started making changes himself, ensuring no one was overloaded. Employees leaned in to watch, a few exchanging glances. One of the more experienced instructors, a woman with a sharp gaze and a practical air, stepped forward. She studied the adjusted schedule, tilting her head slightly. "You sure about this? Usually, we're expected to double up on lessons if things get busy." Ryan didn't look up as he made another note. "Not anymore. If we're short-staffed, we'll find a solution that doesn't involve running people into the ground." The woman crossed her arms, considering him for a beat. Then she nodded. A few employees moved closer, their previous hesitation shifting into something else: engagement. The skepticism hadn't disappeared, but at least now they were paying attention. Ryan turned to Caleb next. "You'll be shadowing today. No full lessons until your knee's better." Caleb hesitated, clearly about to argue, but then caught the look in Ryan's eyes. He exhaled, nodding. "All right." A few instructors exchanged surprised glances. The old way had been simple: push through or be pushed out. This was different. Ryan spent the morning on the slopes, not as an owner observing from a distance, but as someone directly involved. When a guest struggled with their rental boots, he helped adjust them. When a family had questions about the different trails, he took the time to explain. Employees noticed. By midday, a shift in energy had begun to take root. It was subtle: less tension in movements, more ease in conversations. Employees weren't constantly glancing over their shoulders, waiting for reprimands. As Ryan grabbed a quick coffee in the break room, one of the younger instructors approached. He was the same employee who had fumbled with the rental boots the day before. His nervous energy still evident but less pronounced. He hesitated before speaking. I just wanted to say it's weird seeing you actually out there, working with us." Ryan took a sip of his drink, setting it down before responding. "Weird good or weird bad?" The instructor gave a small shrug. "Just different. Usually, the higher-ups only show up when there's a big meeting or something." Ryan leaned back slightly. "That's the problem, isn't it?" The young man considered that for a moment before nodding. Before either could say more, the radio clipped to Ryan's vest crackled to life. A voice came through, tense but controlled. "We've got an issue at the Black Diamond Run, guest injury. Ski patrol's on it, but they're asking for backup." Ryan was already moving. He grabbed his jacket, heading toward the emergency response station. By the time he reached the base of the lift leading to the advanced slopes, the patrol team was loading a guest onto a rescue sled. The injured skier clutched his leg, pain evident in his face. Ryan knelt beside the lead patrol member. "What happened?" The patrol officer, a veteran with years of experience, glanced up. "Took a bad fall. Possible fracture. We're taking him down now." Ryan nodded, stepping back as they secured the guest. But as he turned, he caught something in the distance: another skier standing off to the side, watching with a tense expression. Ryan approached. "You with him?" The man nodded. "Yeah." He said his binding felt off before the run, but he didn't want to hold up the group. Ryan's stomach tightened. Equipment issues were supposed to be caught before guests hit the slopes. He made a mental note to check in with the rental team later. By the time he returned to the main lodge, the atmosphere had shifted again. Employees had heard about the accident, and there was an unspoken question in the air: how would this be handled? Ryan didn't wait for someone else to take charge. He went straight to the rental shop, gathering the employees inside. Without preamble, he addressed them. "We had a guest go down on the Black Diamond, said his binding felt off before his run." The room went still. One of the rental techs, a man with grease-streaked hands and a no-nonsense expression, frowned. "We check every set before they go out." Ryan met his gaze. "Then we need to check again. Every single one. Starting now." There was no argument. Employees moved quickly, pulling gear from racks, double-checking bindings and adjustments. Ryan joined them, rolling up his sleeves. As he worked alongside them, something shifted. Conversations became more fluid, less guarded. Employees began offering suggestions, ways to streamline the process, methods to improve safety checks. For the first time, they weren't just following orders. They were invested. By the end of the day, Ryan could feel the difference. Employees weren't just waiting for things to go back to the way they had been. They were cautiously, hesitantly, starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, things really would change. Ryan stood outside as the last of the guests filtered out, the mountain now bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. It wasn't just about fixing schedules or enforcing rules. It was about rebuilding something deeper: trust, respect, purpose. And for the first time in a long time, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be.